Pastor Samuel Whitaker's voice trembled as he whispered, his hands slick with blood, while police officers forced him to the ground. For 12 years, he had been a pillar of faith, a man who turned Grace Tower Ministries into one of Houston's most powerful churches. To his congregation, he was a leader. To his family, he was a protector. To his wife, Naomi Whitaker, he was everything. He had loved her with a devotion that could rival his faith. When they met, he knew about her past, how she had loved another man before him, how that love had brought a child into the world. But he chose her anyway. He welcomed her daughter, raising the child as his own. Naomi had given him 3 more children, and for 12 years, their life together seemed perfect. But faith is tested, love is challenged, and on one fateful night, Samuel Whitaker witnessed a betrayal so deep, it shattered the foundation of everything he had built. Hold on tight, everyone, because today we're diving into a true crime story of devotion, deception, and a revelation so unthinkable it led to tragedy. Meet Pastor Samuel Whitaker. At 41, Pastor Samuel Whitaker was a man of stature, broad shoulders, a deep, commanding voice, and a presence that made even the most wayward soul sit up and listen. His sermons weren't just words. They were fire. They ignited faith, demanded obedience, and reinforced his unwavering belief in order and discipline. But Pastor Samuel wasn't just a preacher. He was a man deeply in love. Samuel saw in Naomi a woman of grace, a woman chosen by God to stand beside him. He vowed to build a life of faith and devotion with her. For 12 years, he believed he had done just that, until the truth found him. Meet Naomi Whitaker. 35 years old, the perfect image of a preacher's wife. Elegant, graceful, a woman who knew the weight of her role. In the eyes of the church, she was devoted, standing beside her husband, supporting his ministry, raising their children in faith. But beneath the surface, Naomi was more than a pastor's wife. She was a woman who had once loved fiercely and lost deeply. Before Pastor Samuel, there was Christopher Moore, a love that burned hot, young, and full of promise. They had a child together, a little girl born from passion, but life was not kind to their love. Christopher wasn't ready. He dreamed of more, of a future beyond fatherhood, and Naomi was left to raise their daughter alone. Then came Pastor Samuel, a man who offered her security, faith, and stability. He didn't just love her, he saved her. And in return, she gave him everything: her heart, her loyalty, her trust, or so he thought. Meet Christopher Moore, 39 years old, charismatic, charming, the man who had walked away from Naomi once, but never truly let her go. While Pastor Samuel built his empire of faith, Christopher built a reputation of his own, a man who always knew the right words to say, the right way to make a woman feel seen. Years had passed, but when Christopher and Naomi crossed paths again, old embers sparked, conversations that lasted too long, laughter that carried too easily, a history that refused to be buried. For years, Pastor Samuel ignored the signs. Faith had made him blind. Until one night, the truth was undeniable. It was supposed to be another quiet Saturday night at Grace Tower Ministries. The women's fellowship gathering was scheduled for the morning by 9 a.m., a cherished time when the congregation came together in prayer. Yet a day before, a text confirmed the meeting had been canceled. Still, Naomi lied about it, using the pretext of fellowship as cover for her secret rendezvous, saying it's for the evening. Meanwhile, Pastor Samuel Whitaker remained in his element, lingering after the service to offer his final words of guidance. His voice, calm, reassuring, and honed by years of sermons, echoed through the now empty sanctuary. But tonight, that voice faltered, as the unraveling of deception set in motion a chain of events that would soon lead to tragedy. Pastor Samuel couldn't shake the unease creeping into his spirit. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was something deeper, something clawing at the edges of his mind, whispering that his world was not as solid as he believed. He brushed it off, forcing a smile as he guided his wife, Naomi, toward their car. She was radiant as always, the picture-perfect pastor's wife, her hand resting gently on his arm, her laughter soft as she bid farewell to lingering church members. The drive home was quiet. Samuel usually took comfort in the silence, But tonight it felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. He stole glances at Naomi as she gazed out the window, her fingers lightly tapping against her lap, a habit she had when she was deep in thought. "What's on your mind?" he asked. She turned to him with a practiced smile. "Just thinking about the sermon." A lie. He knew her well enough to recognize the distance in her eyes, the way her fingers never stopped tapping, but he let it go. He had learned over the years that some battles weren't worth starting. They pulled into the driveway, the house standing in the dim glow of the porch light, a sanctuary built on faith and devotion, or so he had believed. "I'm going to take a quick bath," Naomi said as she stepped inside, already kicking off her heels. Samuel nodded, sinking onto the couch as he loosened his tie. The day had been long, and the weight of responsibility pressed against his shoulders. He leaned his head back, exhaling deeply. That's when he heard it, a soft vibration. His eyes flicked toward Naomi's phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter. Another buzz, then another. He wasn't the kind of man who pried. Trust was the foundation of marriage. But something inside him, something primal, urged him forward. His fingers hovered over the phone, hesitating for only a second before tapping the screen. And there it was. A message. Simple, intimate. "I miss you. I can still taste you." The room shrank around him. The words seared into his mind, branding themselves onto his soul like an unforgivable sin. His breath hitched, chest tightening, fingers curling around the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "My Bible." A disguise so absurd it was almost insulting, masking a number he knew all too well. The man who should have been nothing more than Naomi's past was now slithering his way back into their present. His pulse pounded as the unspoken puzzle snapped into place. The stolen glances, the hushed late-night whispers, the way her touch had felt more distant. Now there was no more doubt, a betrayal deeper than flesh, a ghost he had welcomed into their home. His hands trembled, rage coiling like a viper ready to strike. Then a thought struck him like lightning. His children. Samuel's pulse roared in his ears as he stumbled back, the world tilting beneath him. Naomi's daughter, the one he had raised as his own, he had accepted. But what about the others? The ones he believed were his flesh and blood? Doubt slithered in, sinking its venomous fangs into his mind. His vision darkened, and in that moment, one thought consumed him. He needed the truth, and there was only one way to get it. The DNA. His heart pounded as he thought of them. His firstborn son, Caleb, his daughter Rebecca, and his youngest, Micah. Had Naomi ever truly been his, or had their entire marriage been built on a lie? The next morning, Samuel moved with careful precision. He had always been a man of patience, of calculated steps. This would be no different. First, Caleb. The boy was 12, the first seed he had believed he planted. As he watched him from across the dinner table, the similarities Samuel once took comfort in now felt like an illusion. Was Caleb his legacy or another man's son? Then Micah, his youngest, barely 5 years old. He was the baby of the house, the one who melted hearts with his infectious laughter. Was he mine? And Rebecca, his only daughter. She had always been his little princess, the one who clung to him, the one who shared his sharp wit. 3 children, 3 possible betrayals. Samuel waited until Naomi was deep in her evening routine. Long baths and scented candles. While she soaked, he acted. One by one, he collected what he needed. A hair from Caleb's pillow, a loose strand from Rebecca's hairbrush, a fallen eyelash from Micah's cheek as he slept. "Forgive me, Lord, but I need to know." The next morning, being Wednesday at 9:15 a.m., Samuel took the samples to the lab. This time, his hands didn't shake. He was a man on a mission. 3 days stretched into eternity. Every sermon, every prayer, every interaction with Naomi felt like a performance. He had perfected the art of pretending. Then the call came. He answered on the first ring, his voice steady. "Mr. Whitaker, your results are ready." His grip on the phone tightened. "Caleb Whitaker, 0% probability of paternity." Silence. "Micah Whitaker, 0% probability of paternity." His stomach turned. "Rebecca Whitaker, 99.9% probability of paternity." Samuel exhaled sharply, gripping the desk for support. Out of 3 children, only one was truly his. Caleb and Micah belonged to another man. The room spun, bile rising in his throat. The betrayal wasn't just one stolen moment. Naomi had built an entire family on deception. But he wasn't finished yet. Ava wasn't his. But was she truly Christopher Moore's? Or had Naomi deceived even her former lover? He needed one more test, that of Ava. That night, as the house settled into silence, Samuel moved with careful precision. He had done this before, with his own children, waiting until they were deep in sleep. Ava's soft breaths filled the dimly lit room as he stood over her bed, his heart pounding. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the storm brewing around her. With a steady hand, he reached down, gently twirling a loose strand of her hair between his fingers before carefully plucking it free. She stirred slightly but didn't wake. He exhaled. Now he had everything he needed. The next Saturday early morning, Samuel submitted Ava's hair sample, requesting a comparison with the previous DNA tests he had conducted on his children. The wait was unbearable. Every second stretched into eternity. And then the results arrived that evening. He got there with his hands trembling as he opened the envelope. Ava Whitaker, no genetic match to Samuel Whitaker. Samuel's blood ran cold. Ava wasn't just not his. She shared the same DNA as the 2 boys. The truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. His wife and his ex had been seeing each other, and now he had the proof. The question remained, what would he do with it? Samuel drove home from the hospital in silence, his grip on the steering wheel tight. The DNA results sat on the passenger seat, but he didn't need to look at them again. Every number, every word was already burned into his mind. Only one of the 3 children was his. The other 2 boys, his sons, shared the same DNA as Ava. The truth was undeniable. Naomi and Christopher Moore had been seeing each other. For how long? Since before their marriage? During? Questions clawed at him, but there were no answers. Only a cold, suffocating reality. He pulled into the driveway, shutting off the engine, but making no move to leave the car. He wasn't ready to walk into that house to see Naomi's face, to pretend for even a second that things were normal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he forced himself to step inside. Naomi was already dressed, adjusting her scarf in the mirror. "I won't be long," she said, slinging her purse over her shoulder. "Women's fellowship." Samuel barely reacted. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the women's fellowship had been canceled a day before. A message had been sent across the group chat, informing all members. But Naomi still got dressed, still left, still played the devoted pastor's wife, still lied that the women's group was holding a special evening prayer session. She wasn't going for fellowship. She was going to him. Christopher Moore was waiting in the church's storage room, a dimly lit space tucked away at the back of the building. Stacks of unused chairs lined the walls, along with old hymn books and cleaning supplies. It wasn't a place people visited often, making it the perfect hidden spot. Naomi arrived moments later, glancing over her shoulder before slipping inside. "You're late," Christopher smirked, stepping closer. "I had to make sure everything was in place," she whispered, but the urgency in her voice betrayed her restraint. Their bodies met in a desperate entanglement, years of secrecy boiling over. The walls of the store knew their sins well. This wasn't the first time. They disappeared into each other once more, forgetting the door was open this time. Meanwhile, it was already getting dark, and Samuel sat in silence at home. His soul felt heavy. He had spent his life preaching about faith, about trust, about the sanctity of marriage. But now, he wasn't even sure what his marriage had never been. He needed to be with God. Without another thought, he grabbed his keys and left for the church, seeking the only presence that could soothe his turmoil. The parking lot was empty, unusual for a Saturday, but he paid no mind. As he stepped inside, the vastness of the sanctuary swallowed him. He walked slowly, absorbing the silence, letting it settle in his bones. His wife's name flashed in his mind. On impulse, he pulled out his phone and dialed her number. Off! A strange sensation crept up his spine. His eyes darted around the empty church. Where was she? Something wasn't right. Samuel wandered the halls, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. His mind raced. Maybe she just forgot to charge her phone. Maybe she stepped out. Then he saw it. The church store. The door was open. His brow furrowed. The store was supposed to be locked when not in use. He stepped closer, careful, hesitant. And then, a sound. Muffled, urgent, familiar. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He swallowed hard, moving closer, careful not to make a sound. And then he saw them. Naomi, Christopher, his wife and the father of two of his children. Bodies tangled, hands gripping, mouths silencing the world around them. Samuel's world stopped. 1,000 emotions crashed into him at once. Rage, heartbreak, disbelief. His knees threatened to buckle beneath him. Naomi moaned softly, oblivious to the man who had just stumbled upon the ultimate betrayal. Samuel clenched his fists. The storm inside him had finally exploded. Samuel's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out the sounds of their betrayal. The dim light of the storage room flickered, casting jagged shadows over their tangled bodies. His wife, the woman he had vowed to cherish. Christopher, the man who had stolen two of his children, and now here they were. His fingers curled into fists, nails biting into his palms. His body shook, not from sorrow, not from despair, but from a rage so pure, so consuming, it swallowed every rational thought. His gaze darted around the room, his mind racing. A weapon. His hand landed on something solid, a heavy brass candle holder, stored for Sunday's altar service. Cold metal, weighty, perfect. In one swift motion, he lunged. The first strike came before Christopher even realized he wasn't alone. The candle holder slammed into his ribs with a sickening crack. He grunted, tumbling off Naomi, crashing into the metal shelves behind him. Naomi screamed. Samuel's vision blurred, a red haze clouding his mind. Christopher groaned, clutching his side, trying to rise. But Samuel was faster. He swung again. This time, Christopher dodged. The candle holder missed his skull by inches, colliding instead with a stack of hymnals that tumbled to the floor. "Samuel, stop!" Naomi shrieked, scrambling to her feet. Samuel didn't stop. He couldn't. He lifted the candle holder again, his eyes locked on Christopher, the man who had taken everything from him. He swung. Naomi moved. The brass crushed her skull. A sickening thud. A gasp cut short. Naomi crumpled to the floor, her body convulsing once before going eerily still. Blood, thick and dark, pooled beneath her, seeping into the cracks of the cold tile. Silence. Christopher's breath came in short, ragged bursts. His hands trembled as he stared at her lifeless form. Samuel staggered back, the candle holder slipping from his grip, clattering to the floor. His chest heaved. His mind raced. He had come here to find truth. Instead, he had found death. And now, standing over his wife's body, blood staining his hands, he was no longer just a husband, no longer just a pastor. He was a Mayana. Killeri. What happens next? Does Christopher flee or fight? Does Samuel try to cover it up or call the police? Does his faith break, or does he justify his actions? Some nights change everything. Betrayal, rage, a moment of no return. All right, y'all, buckle up. This true crime story is about to take a turn you won't believe. A church storage room, a hidden affair, and a pastor who walked in at the wrong time. By the time the night was over, one person was dead, and a man of God had blood on his hands. Let's get into it. After the chaos in the storage room, the sound of hurried footsteps and shouted commands filled the air. The church's overnight security had called 911, and within minutes, flashing red and blue lights converged on the building. Officers burst in, their voices sharp and commanding. Samuel, still trembling and stained with blood, was quickly restrained. The brass candle holder, his weapon, lay discarded nearby, silent testimony to the night's brutality. Christopher, wide-eyed and shaking, screamed, "He killed her!" as police cuffed Samuel and let him out. Under the glare of streetlights and amidst a growing crowd of onlookers, Samuel was loaded into a police cruiser. The evidence was damning. Naomi's lifeless body, the scattered remains of the disturbed storage room, and Christopher's desperate cries. Headlines would soon declare the shocking betrayal. A once respected pastor now arrested for murdering his wife on holy ground. In a matter of moments, a sacred space had turned into a crime scene, and Samuel Whitaker's life was forever changed by that fateful night. After the arrest, the investigation quickly took on a life of its own. Detectives combed through every inch of the storage room, piecing together the gruesome puzzle. Forensic experts meticulously documented the scene: the heavy brass candle holder stained with blood, the disturbed hymnals scattered across the floor, and Naomi's lifeless form lying on the cold tile. Interviews with the overnight security guards and shaken church staff painted a damning picture. Witnesses described how, moments before the chaos, they had heard muffled voices and then a blood-curdling scream from inside the building. One guard's frantic call to 911 had been the spark that ignited a full-scale response, sending police racing to the scene. In the days that followed, the media descended on Grace Tower Ministries. Headlines blared, "Betrayal on Holy Ground," and "Pastors Fall from Grace, a Murder Unveiled," as the community struggled to reconcile the man they once revered with the brutal killer now behind bars. As detectives followed the forensic trail, it became clear that the case was about more than a crime of passion. It was a labyrinth of deceit, Naomi's secret rendezvous under the guise of women's fellowship, the shocking DNA results that had revealed a web of infidelity, and a pastor's desperate plunge into violence. The trial loomed on the horizon, promising to peel back every layer of betrayal and expose the dark underbelly of a life that had once been defined by faith. Now, as Samuel Whitaker faced the full weight of the law, the community braced itself for a reckoning that would leave scars on both hearts and history. This true crime story is far from over, and as the investigation continues, the haunting question remains: how could a sanctuary become the stage for such unimaginable treachery? The case rapidly escalated into a full-blown investigation. Detectives discovered that Naomi's secret rendezvous with Christopher was not a one-time mistake. It was a betrayal that had spanned months, even years, hidden behind carefully crafted lies. Interviews with church members, who still struggled to reconcile the image of their revered pastor with the horror of that night, added layers of complexity to the unfolding narrative. As the trial loomed, the community braced itself for answers. The courtroom became the stage for a drama that no one could have imagined. A once respected pastor facing charges for the murder of his wife, a woman whose life had been intertwined with secrets and forbidden affairs. Prosecutors presented the forensic evidence with precise detail, while defense attorneys attempted to argue that Samuel's actions were the result of a profound psychological break. A man pushed beyond the brink by betrayal. Every revelation, every piece of evidence, only deepened the mystery of how a sanctuary could become a crime scene. The public watched, horrified and fascinated, as the case unfolded like a modern-day tragedy, one where the lines between faith, love, and vengeance had been irrevocably blurred. Now, with Samuel behind bars and the trial set to begin, the true crime story of Grace Tower Ministries serves as a chilling reminder. Sometimes the most revered places can hide unspoken truths, and the impact of betrayal can shatter lives in an instant. After a trial that gripped the community, the courtroom fell silent as the jury delivered its decision. Overwhelming forensic evidence, including DNA tests and compelling witness accounts, left no room for doubt about what transpired that fateful night at Grace Tower Ministries. Pastor Samuel Whitaker, once a man who inspired hundreds with his sermons, was found guilty of murdering his wife, Naomi. His actions, driven by a desperate rage aimed at a man he believed had betrayed him, tragically ended the life of the woman he once vowed to love. In a verdict that stunned many, Samuel was sentenced to 28 years in prison, a recognition that, while his crime was unplanned and fueled by overwhelming emotion, its consequences were undeniably devastating. His case stands as a sobering reminder that when betrayal shatters trust, even the most respected figures can fall from grace. And just like that, the pastor who once uplifted a congregation with his stirring sermons now sits behind cold, unyielding bars. Pastor Samuel Whitaker, once a beacon of faith and hope, has become a symbol of how love, betrayal, and unchecked vengeance can twist even the most devout soul into something unrecognizable. What do you all think? Was the punishment too harsh, or did his actions warrant every bit of it? Was Samuel Whitaker a monster driven by unspeakable betrayal, or merely a broken man pushed beyond his limits? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Pastor Samuel entered the courtroom as a revered man of God and left as a convicted murderer. The very man who once stood at the pulpit preaching righteousness now endures a life sentence, his legacy forever marred by the tragic night when rage overpowered reason. His name is now whispered in local conversations, dissected on talk shows, and debated in online forums. A stark reminder that sometimes the consequences of betrayal can shatter lives in an instant. So tell us, was Pastor Samuel Whitaker simply a victim of unbearable heartbreak, or did he cross the line into darkness? Let's talk about it. And if you're drawn to true crime stories that peel back the layers of human nature, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more. Sometimes the truth is even more astonishing than any story you could ever imagine.